obviously, new technology and innovation can have a downside, and one of the downsides is the ability to extract far more hydrocarbons than we thought were possible, including, once you start getting into deep methane or deep natural gas, you're actually tapping into things that are not related to dinosaur fossils. Methane is a naturally occurring gas. There are places in the solar system where where the atmosphere is primarily methane, so it does not require organic origin. So if we dig too deep for methane, we're actually going to a level that has never been seen before, not even in the very earliest history of Earth. So that's very dangerous, I think. But that's why I think it's important for electric cars to be able to compete without economics being a factor. But I think it is very dangerous to be extracting vast quantities of hydrocarbons from deep within the Earth and putting them in the atmosphere. Sooner or later, something very bad will happen. Yeah, so it's definitely a tough thing, and hopefully that transition occurs before it's too late. There's already quite a bit of momentum in the direction of climate change, and accelerating the removal of hydrocarbons from the crust and placing them in the atmosphere is I think, just very unwise. So anyway, that's why I think it's the biggest problem of the 21st century. Well, I think the thing we need to do is the best thing to do to achieve that would be a carbon tax. So I think if we were to just, the market system will work extremely well if it has the right information to work. So if we just apply a tax to carbon and then dial that up according to whatever achieves the target maximum carbon proportion in the atmosphere, that's I think the right way to go. And countries really need to act unilaterally. People can't have this thing, well, if such and such country isn't doing it, I'm not doing it. Well, okay, set a good example, and hopefully over time other countries will fall in line, or get ostracized. So I think that's probably the smart move, and then we can avoid all of there's no need for subsidies, and which are really a backwards way of trying to deal with the lack of a carbon tax. So I think in the good scenario, we're still going to have a significant increase in the carbon in the atmosphere. Temperatures are still going to rise, sea levels will rise. There will be, but it should be. I mean, the Dutch can manage, with their probably a lot of dike companies will. There's a lot of opportunity in the dike business, I think. But I think if we take out action reasonably soon, we can avoid a calamitous outcome. If we only take action, say towards the end of the century, then it's going to be extremely bad. I don't think people quite appreciate the fact that there's the momentum of the climate. Of climate change. It's like even if you stop now, even if we immediately stopped all carbon production, the momentum will still carry forward and increase the temperature, raise water levels, make storms more powerful, all those things. Good outcomes. We do a carbon tax. We minimize carbon production. We move to sustainable transportation, energy production, which, like I said, is going to be sort of solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, and some nuclear. I think we have to sort of accept that nuclear is a good option in certain places, and I actually think that the most likely outcome is a good one, or a reasonably good one where there's damage, but we recover. I actually think that will occur. So I'm quite optimistic about. I'm not suggesting complacency in the least, but I'm optimistic about the future. Okay, so just by process of Mercury is obviously way too close to the sun. You definitely get, I mean, there's maybe some narrow habitable zone on the backside of Mercury, but I think one's sort of asking for trouble on that one. And then Venus, Venus would be a lesson for what Earth could become, you know, in a worst case scenario, which is sort of a superheated, high pressure, well, in the case of Venus, acid bath. So it's literally a high pressure, high temperature acid bath. So definitely not a good place to make another. I mean, I think the most that any probe has even lasted on Venus is measured in hours. And then the Moon is close, but it's really a small rock, you know, that's just circling Earth with no atmosphere. So very limited amounts of water ice that are sort of in very permanently shadowed craters, and then it's got a 28-day rotational cycle, which isn't great for plants. So it would be quite tough to make a self-sustaining civilization on the Moon. So then coming to Mars, Mars is definitely a fixer-upper of a planet. You know, it's not perfect, but feasible. I mean, it's got a rotational period of 24.5 hours, so remarkably similar to Earth. It's got just under half Earth's gravity, so it's a lot closer gravitationally. It's got a lot of water ice. Almost all of Mars has water bound up in ice form in the soil. The soil has turned out to be non-toxic based on probes that we've sent there, so you could theoretically add, if you had a greenhouse and some fertilizer and you just sort of warm things up and pressurized it a little bit, then you could grow plants on Mars. And Mars has a CO2 atmosphere which plants like to consume. So plants consume CO2 and on net exude oxygen. So I think it's very, very doable to create a Mars base, self-sustaining Mars base, and then ultimately terraform the planet to make it like Earth, so we could just walk around outdoors. It'd be obviously a longer-term project, but it is within the realm of possibility. And then, of course, going beyond that, you go into like Jupiter and gas giants, and you could potentially do something on the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, but that's way harder than Mars. I'm not the biggest fan of biofuels, because I think it's difficult. You know, again, I try to look at things like just calculate the basic physics of it. I mean, really elementary stuff, and say, okay, well, what percentage of the incident sunlight is bound up in usable chemical energy, and then once you have that chemical energy, how much of that is then translated into electricity? And you have to compare, of course, that total efficiency with just having solar panels. And I mean, unless I've made some really dumb mistake, which is possible, but you're about 100 times off with biofuels. So so essentially, what it boils down to is how many, what's your watts per square meter of electrical energy generated with the best case biofuel. I'm not talking about like take every assumption and maximize it. So don't worry, don't say, oh well, maybe there's somebody could invent something better. Say, what is the best? Just envelope the whole thing, and say you had unbelievably efficient plants, maximally efficient. I mean, you can't violate any laws of thermodynamics, but like assuming you're at the limit of the laws of thermodynamics in all those cases, and biofuels, at least for terrestrial, land-based biofuels, there's no way this makes sense. You end up being around maybe 0.2%, efficient, whereas in turning sunlight into electrical energy, whereas commercial solar panels are 20% efficient. So why would you ever do biofuels? And then it's not as though there are large swaths of arable land unused. So you have to say, well, if you go with biofuels, it's going to either result in wilderness being cultivated or an increase in food prices. And then you can also say, is it possible, if you stopped all food production in the world to generate enough energy to meet the world's needs? And like, yeah, you could probably, that's about right, actually, if you stopped all food production. You could just about meet the world's energy needs. So now there is a possibility of ocean-based, because Earth's surface is mostly ocean. So if you could find a way to, maybe some sort of ocean algae-based solution where you're unconstrained by surface area. Although I still think you'd have to compare that to a bunch of floating solar panels, and I think you still lose on floating solar panels. So, and yeah, it's just, there are a lot of people, particularly in the US, who are vehemently against electric cars and sort of sustainable power. And it's quite difficult to reason with them, actually. And they'll say, well, some scientists don't think it's a problem. And I'm like, well, okay, you can find some number of people that will disagree with anything. This actually reminds me of the tobacco industry, where for the longest time they were actually complaining that you'd see ads where they claimed tobacco was healthy for you. I mean, hard to believe these days, but and then there were these reports where there seemed to be some correlation between lung cancer and smoking, and they're like, oh, our scientists have conducted experiments and they show there's no relation at all. It's complete nonsense, so it got to the point where almost any reasonable scientist would say that yes, of course, smoking causes lung cancer and all sorts of other bad things. Not definitively, but it's extremely likely. And yet the tobacco industry would still say, oh, scientists disagree because 1 or 2% of the scientific community didn't feel that way. And that's kind of, and then the public just hears scientists disagree. They don't hear 99% of them think it's stupid.